Hey, thank you so much for watching, listening. We're continuing our series called Sheep, Shepherd, Shams. Of course, I want to invite you to subscribe. We have amazing content on this channel, and it's really encouraging, but also thought-provoking, curious, and I think it will ultimately, hopefully, my prayer for you is that it connects you with Jesus better than you ever have in the past. So just encourage you to subscribe, share this with your friends, like it, because it's really fun. And of course, the jokes. I know a lot of you quit before I get to the joke, which I can appreciate why you would do that, because they're pretty cheesy jokes. But let's keep talking about sheep, shepherd, shams. So last week in our last episode, we talked about who are the shams. And in John chapter 10, verses 1 through, verse 18, Jesus identifies, in essence, 5 fake posing sham shepherds, if you will. So he identifies the thief. We talked about the kleptomaniac. We talked about the robber, who's also the bandit, person who's very violent and hurtful. We talked about the wolf, right? The wolf attacks, and the wolf is stuff that happens. The enemy comes. Satan comes as a wolf dressed in sheep's clothing to destroy, to attack, to scatter, to annihilate, to consume. And then we talked about those 3 are hurtful shams. And then we talked about neutral shams, the stranger, as well as the hireling. And sometimes those shams are just neutral voices, but they're not Jesus. And so last week I wanted to really encourage you to think about what are some influences, some voices. And I would say that there are some things that we do even now in our modern living, where we listen to like news reports. I don't know, I remember, and I'll just give this example, and then we're going to talk about Jesus as our shepherd. But I remember in the COVID heavy-duty lockdown here in Denver, we went into lockdown for, 6-8 weeks. And for the first couple weeks of that lockdown, I was really dialed into the news. And I was watching all kinds of news outlets. So BBC, CNN, whatever, all these different news outlets, Fox, blah, blah, blah. And I noticed that after 2 or 3 weeks of that, I was really anxious, worried, uptight, nervous, panicky, fearful, ah. And I thought, wait a second. And I began to evaluate, what am I listening to? What am I reading? What am I feeding myself? Because what I'm doing is setting up these results, right? So doom scrolling, and I think we have to really be careful and evaluate, inventory, what am I feeding? So we not only evaluate what we put in our mouths, but also what we see and hear, because that also affects who we follow and the condition of our soul. Which brings me to the importance of following Jesus as our shepherd. Oh my goodness. Jesus, the shepherd of our soul. How do you not love Jesus? And the more I'm around Jesus, the more I want to be around Jesus. And the more I want to be around Jesus, the more addicted to Jesus I get. And the more addicted to Jesus I get, then I just kind of find myself in this kind of junkie mode where I just am a Jesus junkie. Because I find in Jesus everything that I have looked for in the horizontal existence. And what happens in our horizontal existence, we chase after the mirage, after the wind, after, some things that are elusive. We think we catch it. We think we have significance when we achieve, when we're successful. But then it evaporates and then we have to find another one. But I've found that instead of chasing the horizontal, when I settle into Jesus and I let Jesus be both my vertical and my horizontal, my cross, then I find from my soul that Jesus is the shepherd of my soul and fills and overflows, overflows all of those desires, passions, and needs that I have. So when Jesus talks about himself as our shepherd, it's interesting to consider what he says. In verse 3, Jesus says that the sheep hear the shepherd's voice. And I love this. Jesus calls out his sheep by name. Jesus knows your name. And it says here as well, he leads them out. And it says the sheep follow Jesus because they know his voice. Jesus knows your name. But he has designed us to know his voice. And so these other voices, these other influences, and you're like, well, are you just telling us to turn off the news and shut down? I'm not saying that, but I am saying that Jesus has to be our central focus, that our attention and where we find the solace and comfort and pasture for our souls, and where we find rest and food and rejuvenation is in Jesus, first, foremost, and more than anything. Because Jesus knows your name. He knows your identity. He knows how you're internally organized. He knows what your passions are, what your desires are. He knows. And when you read the shepherd's psalm, Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. That Jesus is our good shepherd. And if we've been following shams, then it's time to say no to the sham and yes to Jesus. And one of the things I've really been thinking about just in the last few days is this whole idea of voice recognition, right? You're like, that's really interesting. I don't know about you, but my phone has like facial recognition, right? So it'll unlock when it sees my face. But we also have, and my daughter has like Alexa. So, hey, Alexa, turn on the lights. And Alexa turns the lights on. So, it's that voice recognition. And we have machines and phones and, devices that can recognize a face and or a voice, or at least vocal commands. But when I thought about this, I started to look into this idea of voice recognition. And you and I are far more sophisticated than any human device. You and I are a lot more complicated, have a lot more ability, more capacity, just complexity to us than just your phone. So when we think about us, you and me, recognizing Jesus' voice, I started to look at voice recognition. And what does that mean for humans? And it's interesting to think about in your brain, certain part of it, and there's all these like sophisticated terms, regions of your brain that are responsible for voice recognition. But I found out that there's something called voice blindness. And what happens is people who have brain injuries and or stroke, they have a difficult time, and sometimes their ability to recognize a voice goes away because of that injury or that trauma. And I would propose to you that sometimes when we have trauma in our lives, be that recent trauma, be that from an experience in your teen years, from your upbringing, your childhood, trauma can really skew your ability to hear Jesus' voice. But I want to come to you today and let you know that no trauma, no hardship, no struggle, no violence that's happened to you or against you is impossible for Jesus to heal. If Jesus can heal the man born blind, that goes back all the way to his birth. If Jesus can heal him all the way back to the very first day of his existence, then Jesus can also heal you and me of any trauma, of any hardship, of any struggle, of any distortion that's happened in our lives that causes us to recognize voices other than Jesus. So I just encourage you, whatever the trauma, whatever the hardship, the struggle, the difficulty that you might find, let's come to Jesus today and say, I want to be your sheep. I want to know your voice. I know, Jesus, you know my name, but I want to know your voice. Teach me your voice. Help me to follow you and walk with you. Because when we let Jesus lead us, he leads us into salvation, and we find pasture, rest, and all of the things our soul desires we find in Jesus. So thank you for subscribing, of course. Go ahead and hit the notification bell right there. That'll keep you posted when we have new content. And here's a question for you. Who's your favorite music, band, group that you like to listen to? I'm not asking you just tell me like Christian stuff, just anybody. I don't care. You might like, you might like Nirvana. I don't know who you might like. You might like, my daughter tells me about new people. She's like, oh, Mom, Harry Styles. whoever. But I'd just be interested to know, who do you like to listen to? And of course, we have this amazing joke. I know you're like, well, amazing is a stretch. As Americans, we call it an elevator, but in London, they call it a lift. I guess we're raised differently. So stupid. All right, but next week will be lots better.